welcome to the video on our second category of nutrients, which are our proteins. Proteins are organic, and they are one of the categories of organic molecules that uses monomers, links those monomers together to make polymers. In the case of proteins, we call the monomers amino acids. And those amino acids have a common structure that's different than the monomers we saw for carbohydrates. So they're distinctive from carbohydrate monomers like glucose. We'll see that structure in a minute. Those amino acids link together to make chains, and those chains are called polymers. We generally just refer to the polymers as proteins. I know that's somewhat confusing. You'll also see them called polypeptides. Either term is fine. All right, so let's look at these particular amino acids. So there are 20 amino acids that are well characterized. We do have other amino acids that may be essential as well or needed, used by living things, and that science is developing, so kind of exciting that we're still learning more. These particular amino acids are showing some trends that we see. So we see some common structure, and that's in the white area of each amino acid, like glycine here. Let's look at that. You can see that there is a C and H and then a COO. That's the carboxyl group. And so that forms a common characteristic of all amino acids. Another is the amino group. That's the N and then the H3. That's the amino group. And you see that all of the amino acids have that structure. What's different between amino acids is what's shown in yellow. And that area, what we call the variable region, can be very simple, like in glycine, it's just a hydrogen, or can be very complex, like look at tryptophan. It has a few carbon rings in there even. So there's a great variety between these amino acids. And we talked about how shape determines function. Well, if you build a protein using mostly glycines, that's going to be a very different protein in its structure and in its function than one that has more complex amino acids like phenylalanine or tryptophan in it. So there's a lot too. There's a lot of different varieties and a lot of different things that we can do with this mix of amino acids. Even though there's only 20 of them, they can do a tremendous amount of things. So let's talk about those functions. And this is a basic list of the key functions of proteins. So all proteins do one of these things in general. And so the first one you'll see is what we call enzymes. So enzymes are a type of protein that are responsible for speeding up chemical reactions. Everything that happens inside of your body is a chemical reaction. And enzymes play a role in many of these chemical reactions, and they're going to make it possible. Maybe that reaction on its own would take 200 years to happen, but with the use of enzymes, we can bring down the amount of energy required for that reaction to occur, and that means it can happen a lot faster. So maybe it can happen in a split second instead of taking years. So enzymes are very important for life. And if all your enzymes stopped working, you would be dead instantly, nearly instantly, because of their importance in the function of living things. Communication is another function of enzymes. So enzymes are able to help with communication by forming chemical reactions or chemical interactions with signals, or they may be the signal. So let me give you an example. There are proteins that are on the surface of your taste buds, and those proteins bind to chemicals in your food, and then they transmit a signal that ultimately ends up in your brain and tells your brain how your food tastes. So communication, that's an example. Another one is our neurotransmitters, those proteins that move from one nerve cell to the next nerve cell to transmit signals through our nervous system. Very important. Plants also use proteins as communication, both on the surface of their membranes, but also as signals that they can send from cell to cell. Transport. So proteins can help with transport of things around inside the living organism. We talked about movement within the organism being one characteristic of life. Proteins definitely can help with that. You might think easily of the proteins of the muscles helping with the transport and movement of our bodies as we move around, but sometimes the transport is on a much smaller scale. For example, you could have proteins that are embedded inside the membrane and act as little gates or channels that allow substances in or out of the cell. Another function of proteins is defense. So helping the organism defend itself against threats. You can easily see how venom as a protein would be an example of a defense. But there's others like our own antibodies help us defend against pathogens, and those antibodies are proteins. Proteins are important in the structure of living things. If you think about even at the cellular level, the cytoskeleton we're going to learn is actually built up of proteins. And so the proteins help form the structure that is the cell. But in other respects, they're important as well in terms of if you think of things like keratin, which is used for the hair, or if you think about a protein in the eye called crystalline, which forms the clear structure of the eyeball. Collagen is important for skin, and skin provides structure, of course. So lots of different ways that proteins contribute to the structure of the organism. The last one here, and maybe you might be surprised that it's last, is storage. And when I'm thinking about storage, I'm thinking about primarily energy storage. Proteins, a lot of people think, oh, I need some energy, I'm going to drink a protein drink. And they think, okay, I'm going to get energy from that. And it's true, you do get energy from that. But so proteins can be an energy source, but really in terms of how living things store their energy, they don't often use proteins. They can get energy from proteins, but they don't store energy in proteins, if that makes sense. They're going to use fats or starches, for example, in the case of plants. There are some exceptions, because in biology we'll learn there are always exceptions to everything, it seems like. And one exception is albumin, which is found in, for example, chicken eggs, right? That is a protein that is made for energy storage. All right, so there are some functions of proteins. And now we need to think about our dietary requirements. What do we need in terms of our diet to get enough for proteins? Sorry, I'm having trouble advancing the slide there. Figured it out. Okay, so our diet, we're going to say the estimate is that 20 to 30% of your calories should come from protein sources. So that means that in a 2,000 calorie diet, 400 to 600 of your calories should be from a protein source. That's a little hard to keep track of, but so you may not be doing that on a daily basis, but it's something to think about as you're making your dietary choices. There is one thing that's important and relates very much to the conversation we're having in this module, which relates to essential versus non-essential amino acids. Oops. Now, the name is a little bit misleading. You'd think essential is something that you have to have, and non-essential is something you don't need to have. The fact is you need to have all 20 of the amino acids, and maybe a good case is being made for additional amino acids, but we'll say 20 for now. So we have 20 essential amino acids, or 20 amino acids that our body needs. The thing is that our body can make 12 of those amino acids. So they're not essential. It's not essential that we get them in our diet because our body can make them. So we have the 8 essential amino acids and we have the 12 non-essential amino acids. The essential ones we have to have in our diet. The non-essential amino acids our body can make. How does this relate to our plant choices and whether a vegetarian diet is healthy or not? The thing is that some of those 8 essential amino acids are not represented in as high a level in certain plants. So plants don't use those amino acids as often to build their own proteins. So if you eat plant tissue, you're not going to get as many of those amino acids. Tryptophan is an example, methionine is an example of 2 amino acids that are really low in for example, soybean. So early on when the vegetarian diets first started taking off, people used soy to replace meat in their diets to try to get their protein. The problem being that soy did not have all the essential amino acids. So it's important if you decide to do a vegetarian diet that you make sure that your vegetarian diet is a mix of many different plant sources and that you research a little bit which essential amino acids you can get from which plants. So if you want to have a vegetarian diet, you might want to make sure you get some nuts, fruits and vegetables, make sure you get in some whole grains because those are going to give some of those essential amino acids that are lacking in other plant-based proteins. All right, so that is it on proteins. Our next video that you're going to watch is on nucleic acids.